Welcome to this IELTS listening practice test. This test contains 40 questions divided into 4 sections and is designed to help you prepare for the IELTS listening exam. Please make sure you have your answer sheet, pen or pencil ready before the test begins. You will hear each recording once only. There will be time for you to read the questions before each section begins. The answers will be provided at the end of the complete test. Please follow the instructions carefully and write your answers. We wish you the very best of luck. You will hear a conversation between a woman and a conference services coordinator at the Westbridge Innovation Centre. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6.
Good morning, Westbridge Innovation Centre. This is Oliver speaking. How may I help you?
Hello, I'd like to register for your professional development programme next month.
Certainly. I'll just need to ask you a few questions to complete the registration form. Could I have your full name first, please?
Yes, it's Natalie Brooks.
Sorry, was that Natalie with an I-E?
That's right, Natalie. And Brooks is spelled B-R-O-O-K-S.
Thank you. Now, which organisation are you currently working for?
It's Harbour Analytics.
Could you repeat that?
Harbour Analytics. Harbour is H-A-R-B-O-U-R and Analytics is A-N-A-L-Y-T-I-C-S.
Great. And what's your current position there?
I'm a project coordinator. Actually, my official title changed recently.
Oh?
Yes, it used to be Assistant Project Coordinator, but it's now simply Project Coordinator.
I'll record the current title. Now, what's the best contact number for you?
It's 0719 846 3825. No, sorry, that was my old work number. The correct one is 0719 846 3852.
Let me read that back. 07198 463 852.
Yes, that's correct.
Excellent. There are 4 workshops available on Saturday morning. The first is Leading High-Performance Teams. The second is Strategic Decision-Making. The third is Workplace Communication. And finally, Innovation in Project Delivery. Have you decided which one you'd like?
Originally, I was going to choose Strategic Decision-Making, but after speaking with my manager, I realised the communication workshop would be more useful for my current role. So I'd like Workplace Communication, please.
Certainly. Do you have any dietary requirements we should know about?
Nothing serious. I don't need gluten-free meals or anything like that. I just require a vegetarian lunch.
That's no problem.
That is the end of questions 1 to 6. Now you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10.
Would you also like us to reserve accommodation for you? We have a discounted rate at the conference residence.
I did consider that, but my company has already booked a hotel nearby, so I won't need accommodation through the centre.
That's absolutely fine. Since this is your first management program, I'd also recommend taking a look at the optional workshops. Many experienced managers choose strategic decision-making, while team leaders often enjoy leading high-performance teams. However, participants who are relatively new to management generally benefit most from workplace communication because it focuses on practical day-to-day situations.
That sounds like the right choice for me.
Now, regarding the registration fee, it covers all daytime sessions, refreshments, lunch, and a printed handbook containing the presentation slides and additional reading. Evening networking events require a separate booking, and transport to the venue isn't included because most participants arrange their own travel.
That's helpful to know.
Finally, before arriving on Friday, we'd like everyone to download our conference mobile application. You'll use it to check in, receive timetable updates, and access digital resources during the program. There's no need to confirm your workshop again unless you decide to change it.
Perfect. I'll install it this evening.
Excellent. We look forward to welcoming you next month.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
That is the end of section 1. Now turn to section 2. You will hear a visitor services manager giving a talk to a group of new visitors at the Northgate Innovation and Heritage Centre. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Northgate Innovation and Heritage Centre. My name is Sarah Mills, and I'm one of the Visitor Services Managers here. Before you begin exploring the site, I'd like to spend a few minutes explaining its history and introducing some of the main attractions. This should help you plan your visit and make the most of your time with us. Many first-time visitors assume the centre was originally created as a venue for business conferences or training courses because those events are held here quite regularly today. Others believe it was established for university engineering students. In fact, neither of those was the original purpose. The buildings were once part of one of the region's most important engineering complexes, and after the factory closed, there was a strong local campaign to preserve the site instead of replacing it with modern developments. The Heritage Centre you see today grew directly out of that preservation project. Now, before you head off on your own, I'd strongly recommend starting your visit in the Orientation Theatre. I know some people prefer to walk straight into the exhibition spaces, but they often discover later that they've missed several areas simply because they weren't familiar with the layout. The short introductory presentation explains the history of the site, introduces the different exhibition zones, and suggests routes depending on whether you're planning a short visit or staying for the whole day. It only lasts about 10 minutes, but most visitors find it well worth watching. One of our busiest areas is the interactive workshop zone. It's particularly popular with families and school groups, although adults seem to enjoy it just as much. Unlike our permanent exhibitions, this area doesn't remain exactly the same throughout the year. Approximately every 3 months, new activities and displays replace the previous ones, so even visitors who've been here before usually discover something they haven't seen. You're welcome to take photographs inside, although we ask you not to use flash during live demonstrations. And despite what some guidebooks suggest, you don't have to join a guided tour before entering. If you have time later in the day, I'd also encourage you to walk along the Riverside Trail. Following the recent redevelopment of the grounds, the trail now continues beyond the old canal bridge to include an additional riverside section that wasn't accessible previously. Because of this extension, the complete walk takes a little longer than it did in the past. Most of the route is suitable for wheelchairs and pushchairs, although there's one steeper section near the historic lock where some visitors may prefer to use the alternative path shown on your map. Before I finish this part of the introduction, I'd like to mention the Innovation Laboratory. This is one of the newest parts of the centre and is often overlooked because it's located behind the main exhibition building. Throughout the week, research teams from local universities and technology companies carry out demonstrations there. Visitors aren't able to take part directly, but they can watch the researchers through a large viewing gallery while experiments are taking place. Some visitors confuse these sessions with the practical demonstrations given by retired engineers elsewhere in the centre, but they're actually two completely different attractions.
That is the end of questions 11 to 15. Now you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20.
Before I finish, I'd like to tell you about a few of the facilities around the centre that visitors often ask about. Let's start with the Welcome Gallery, which is where most people begin their visit after watching the introductory presentation. Families with young children often spend quite a while there because one section has been designed especially to encourage younger visitors to explore the history of engineering through interactive displays. Adults usually head straight for the historical exhibits, but children tend to enjoy the hands-on activities much more. Now, many people are particularly interested in the Innovation Laboratory. Unlike the exhibition areas, this isn't simply a collection of displays. Throughout the week, engineers, university researchers, and technology companies use the laboratory to demonstrate ongoing projects. Visitors remain in the viewing area while specialists carry out their work, and staff members explain what's happening at regular intervals. The demonstrations vary from day to day, depending on the research program. Moving on to the Riverside Cafe, this has become one of our most popular facilities since reopening. Although the menu changes with the seasons, we've made a conscious decision to work with farms and food producers from the surrounding area whenever possible. As a result, many of the dishes feature ingredients supplied by local businesses, something that visitors have responded to very positively. The Learning Studio has developed considerably over the past year. Rather than displaying a permanent collection, it's used for temporary exhibitions and educational programs. Because these exhibitions are regularly updated, returning visitors often discover entirely different displays from those they saw on an earlier visit. In fact, several exhibitions are replaced each year to reflect new themes and partnerships. Finally, I'd like to mention the Heritage Workshop. This is where visitors can observe traditional engineering skills and restoration techniques. During weekdays, the workshop is mainly used for conservation work, but at weekends, additional practical sessions are organised for the public. These activities are extremely popular, so if you're planning to attend one during your visit, it's worth checking today's timetable before making other plans. That concludes the information about the main visitor facilities. If you have any questions, members of staff wearing green identification badges will be happy to help throughout the day.
This is the end of section 2. You will now move on to section 3. You are about to hear a discussion between two postgraduate students, Ava and Leo, and their supervisor, Professor Grant. They are meeting to review the progress of their research project on the use of artificial intelligence in disaster response planning. Now you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24.
Good afternoon, both of you. Thank you for sending me the revised draft before today's meeting. I've had enough time to read it carefully, and I can already see that you've made some significant improvements since our last discussion.
That's a relief. We spent almost 2 weeks reworking the proposal because we realized our original plan was becoming far too broad.
At one stage, we were trying to investigate evacuation planning, emergency communication, flood prediction, and resource allocation, all within the same study. It sounded manageable when we first discussed it, but once we started reviewing the literature, it became obvious that we couldn't explore every area in enough depth. I remember saying that enthusiasm is valuable, but research usually benefits from a clearly defined objective. The strongest improvement in your revised proposal isn't that you've added more material, it's that you've finally established a single, coherent focus. Everything now contributes to answering one central research question instead of several unrelated ones.
That actually made the rest of the project easier to organize. Once we knew exactly what we were investigating, we could decide which information was genuinely relevant.
And that decision influenced your data collection as well, didn't it? Yes. Initially, we relied mostly on published journal articles and government reports, but after narrowing the topic, we realized we needed more practical evidence. We contacted several emergency management agencies and asked whether they could provide operational data from previous training exercises. A few organizations couldn't help because of confidentiality policies, but enough agreed for us to build a much stronger data set. That was a sensible approach. Academic research is important, but combining it with real operational information often produces a more balanced investigation.
Collecting the material took much longer than we expected. Different organizations stored their records in completely different formats.
Some sent spreadsheets, others provided written reports, and one agency even supplied scanned documents. Before we could analyze anything, we had to organize all the information into a consistent format, which is exactly where your analytical software became useful. Yes, at first we thought the software's greatest strength would be making predictions, but that wasn't really the case. Its biggest advantage was sorting and organizing thousands of individual records far more efficiently than we could have managed ourselves. We still checked everything manually before accepting the results. That's an important point. Technology should support critical thinking rather than replace it.
Once everything had been organized, the patterns became much easier to interpret. We noticed relationships between response times and resource allocation that we'd completely overlooked earlier.
And those findings have led to much stronger conclusions than I saw in your first draft. Instead of making broad claims, you're now supporting each argument with clear evidence. That gives the report much greater credibility. We're pleased with the direction it's taking now, although we still have quite a bit of editing left to do. That's perfectly normal. Research develops through revision. What matters is that the structure is now solid, which makes the remaining work much easier.
That is the end of questions 21 to 24. Now you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30.
Now that we've talked about the overall structure, I'd like to go through the remaining sections of your report. Most of them are in good shape, but there are still a few areas where you could strengthen the final submission.
We expected that. We concentrated on collecting and analyzing the data first, so some sections probably haven't had as much attention as they should.
That's understandable. Let's begin with the literature review. I noticed you've replaced several older references with more recent publications, which improves the relevance of the discussion. More importantly, you've moved beyond simply describing previous research. In most places, you're comparing different viewpoints and explaining why some findings are more convincing than others. We tried to avoid turning it into a list of summaries. Instead, we wanted readers to understand how earlier studies influenced our own research questions. And that approach works well. Just make sure you maintain that critical style consistently throughout the section. Moving on to the methodology, I think readers would benefit from a little more detail about how you selected your data sources. At the moment, you explain what you collected, but not always why certain organizations were included while others weren't.
We assumed that information would make the section too long.
Not necessarily. Even a brief explanation of your selection criteria would improve transparency and help readers understand the reasoning behind your decisions. We'll add a paragraph explaining that. The data analysis is one of the strongest parts of the report. Your graphs are clear and your interpretation is generally balanced. However, remember that no research project is perfect.
You mean we should discuss the weaknesses more openly?
Exactly. Every study has limitations, whether they're related to the sample, the availability of information, or the methods used. Acknowledging those limitations doesn't weaken your work. It actually makes your conclusions more credible. I also appreciated the section on research ethics. You've clearly considered issues such as confidentiality and responsible use of information, especially when working with operational records from emergency organizations. That took longer than expected because different organizations had different requirements. And you've explained those differences well. I wouldn't make any major changes there. Finally, let's talk about your presentation. The content is well organized, and the slides you've shown me are clear without containing too much text. One thing I'd strongly recommend is arranging a practice session before the assessment.
With classmates?
Preferably another research group. People who haven't been involved in your project are more likely to ask questions you haven't anticipated. That's a good point. We're so familiar with the project now that we probably overlook things that aren't obvious to other people. Exactly. Treat those questions as an opportunity rather than a criticism. If you can answer unexpected questions confidently, you'll almost certainly feel more relaxed during the actual presentation.
We'll organise a practice session early next week.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to reading the final version. Overall, you've made impressive progress since the first proposal, and I think the project now has a clear direction and a strong evidence base. Thank you. We'll make the remaining revisions and send you the completed report by Friday. Perfect. If anything unexpected comes up before then, don't hesitate to get in touch.
That is the end of Section 3. You will now move on to Section 4. You are about to hear part of a university lecture about digital twin technology and its role in managing modern infrastructure. You have some time to look at questions 31 to 40.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today's lecture introduces a technology that has attracted considerable attention over the last decade: digital twins. Although the term may sound futuristic, the basic idea is relatively straightforward. A digital twin is a virtual representation of a real object or system that is continuously updated using information collected from the physical world. Engineers can observe how equipment performs in real time, predict future behavior, and evaluate possible improvements without immediately making changes to the actual system. To understand why this technology has become so important, it's useful to look briefly at how infrastructure was managed in the past. For many years, engineers depended heavily on regular inspections. Bridges, railway lines, power stations, and water treatment facilities were examined at fixed intervals by trained specialists. These inspections often identified obvious signs of damage, but they also had limitations. Since they were carried out periodically rather than continuously, problems developing between inspections sometimes remained unnoticed until they became much more serious. Another common approach involved analysing historical records. Engineers reviewed maintenance reports, repair histories, and equipment performance over many years in an attempt to predict future failures. While this information was certainly valuable, it mainly reflected what had already happened rather than what was happening at that moment. Consequently, maintenance decisions were sometimes based on conditions that had already changed. One of the biggest disadvantages of these traditional methods was that action often took place only after equipment had begun to fail. Repairs carried out under emergency conditions are usually more expensive and can disrupt essential public services. As cities expanded and infrastructure became increasingly complex, engineers began searching for more efficient approaches. This search coincided with rapid advances in sensor technology. Today, thousands of electronic devices can be installed throughout an infrastructure network. These sensors measure factors such as temperature, vibration, pressure, and energy consumption, transmitting continuous data to central computer systems. Instead of relying on occasional inspections, engineers can now monitor conditions every minute of every day. Collecting information, however, is only the first stage. The real value lies in combining that information with a digital model of the infrastructure itself. Because the virtual model reflects current operating conditions, engineers are able to test different scenarios before making decisions in the real world. For example, they might examine how changing traffic patterns could affect a bridge, or whether increasing the capacity of a water network would create unexpected pressure elsewhere in the system. These simulations allow organizations to compare several possible solutions while avoiding unnecessary disruption. In many cases, they also reduce costs by identifying the most effective option before any physical work begins. Perhaps the greatest long-term advantage is improved system reliability. When maintenance can be planned before failures occur, infrastructure remains available for longer periods. Unexpected interruptions become less common, and public confidence generally increases. So far, we've concentrated on the advantages of digital twins. However, it's important not to assume that creating a virtual model automatically solves every infrastructure problem. One of the first concerns is data security. A digital twin can bring together enormous quantities of information from sensors, maintenance systems, and operational databases. Some of that information may be commercially sensitive, while other data could reveal details about critical infrastructure. If such systems are poorly protected, unauthorized access could have consequences far beyond the loss of confidential information. Organizations therefore need robust security measures, including controlled access and regular monitoring of their digital networks. A second obstacle is the cost of development. Creating a sophisticated digital model isn't simply a matter of purchasing software. Engineers first need to understand the physical infrastructure in considerable detail, and existing systems may need to be upgraded before they can communicate with modern sensors. For an older railway network, for example, installing new equipment across hundreds of kilometers could represent a substantial investment. This is one reason why organizations often introduce digital twins gradually, beginning with particularly important components rather than attempting to model an entire system immediately. There is also a technical issue that is sometimes underestimated: compatibility. Infrastructure rarely depends on a single manufacturer's equipment. A transport authority might use sensors supplied by several companies, while its maintenance records could be stored in a completely different database. If these systems cannot exchange information effectively, the digital twin will have an incomplete picture of the physical network. For that reason, engineers increasingly emphasize common standards and interoperable software. A digital model is only as useful as the information entering it. If one part of the system cannot communicate with another, even a highly sophisticated model may produce misleading results. Another challenge is organizational rather than technological. Developing and operating a digital twin requires cooperation between several groups. Engineers understand the physical infrastructure. Software specialists manage the digital environment. Data analysts interpret the information, and public authorities may be responsible for decisions involving budgets, regulations, and public safety. These groups don't necessarily use the same terminology or have the same priorities. An engineer may focus on technical reliability, whereas a government department might be more concerned with affordability or disruption to residents. Successful projects therefore depend on effective communication between the different organizations involved. Finally, we should remember that a digital twin is not a product that can simply be installed and forgotten. The physical infrastructure changes over time. Components are replaced, buildings are modified, sensors deteriorate, and software becomes outdated. The virtual model must therefore undergo continuous maintenance if it is to remain an accurate representation of the real system. This is particularly important because an inaccurate digital twin can potentially be worse than having no model at all. If engineers trust outdated information, they may make decisions based on conditions that no longer exist. Looking ahead, digital twins are likely to become increasingly sophisticated. Future systems may combine real-time sensor information with artificial intelligence, allowing them not merely to describe what is happening, but to anticipate potential failures and recommend appropriate responses. Nevertheless, technological capability should not be confused with good infrastructure management. Digital twins can provide extraordinary analytical power, but they still require accurate information, responsible decision-making, and cooperation between the people who design, operate, and regulate our infrastructure. The most successful projects, therefore, are unlikely to be those with the most technologically impressive models. They will be the ones in which technology is integrated carefully into a broader management strategy. Thank you.